Welcome everyone to a special haunted edition of Tales from a Small Town Journalist.
Hey, welcome back. It's part 2 of our epic Halloween-themed episode with Heritage Interpreter and Dark Side of Soul podcast co-host Sean Morrissey, coming to us all the way from South Korea. Just to give you an idea of the logistics behind scheduling a podcast interview across the globe, we literally spoke to one another from 2 different days. It was a Friday evening for me and a late Saturday morning for him. So there's a bit of time travel involved. We're going to dive into more conspiracy theories, where they come from and why. And since this is the spooky season, Sean also has a few ghost stories to tell. There's a South Korean version, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, and an especially eerie tale about what's known as a water ghost. This is a nasty little beast, let me tell you. So you definitely want to check that out. It's always great talking to Sean. I love hearing stories from his part of the world, especially folklore, legends, and ghost stories. It's fascinating to see how we're different and how we're the same. And that last part can sometimes be a little depressing, sadly. Anyway, let's get back to the second part of that interview. So please enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Moby Dick, Back from the Deep, the webcomic chronicling the white whale's return in modern times as a zombified beast. This terrifying high seas adventure boasts more than 78,000 viewers, 4 successful Kickstarter campaigns, and numerous mentions on comic book and horror podcasts, e-zines, and more. Check out this monstrous tale at backfromthedeep.com if you dare. The thing that I've noticed is when I've a lot of times I try to avoid conversations about it, because if I talk to people for not even very much, they'll throw that little bit of doubt into your head. And it's like, I know for a fact these things are safe, and I know for a fact they work. And because like I work like alongside people who are like right there in there who know. It's like all the information is out there, it's transparent, it's all there. But it just puts that little bit of doubt, and that's really all it takes, because a lot of these people, it's just that, well, I'm just not sure. And that's a really difficult thing to combat when it comes to something where it's like, oh, you actually have to go and get something foreign injected into yourself. It is a little bit of a high ask, but it's our only way out of this, it seems. So
yeah, like I think the idea, kind of bring it a little bit back to using fan death again as an example. One thing with conspiracy theories and then urban legends generally is that they do tend to eventually disappear. Like they'll wither away, and a lot of them start based on a misunderstanding of something. So one of the theories for fan death is that electric fans started, I think first were mass produced by a Japanese company in 1909. In 1910, Japan occupied Korea. It started with the Protectorate Treaty in 1905 and then full annexation in 1910. And then they occupied Korea for 35 years and until the end of World War II. And so electric fans were very likely introduced in Korea at that time. So there may have been a certain level of misunderstanding of this new technology. And then this gives rise to a lot of different urban legends. Fast forward to, say, the late 60s, when microwaves were first being sold, and they became a little bit more affordable a few years later, say in the early 70s. There were a lot of urban legends surrounding microwaves because people still didn't fully understand them. And so there's the famous urban legend of the woman who bathes her puppy, or a poodle, and she always had a difficult time drying the dog off. So she thought, "Oh, I bet you my new microwave could dry him off quicker than this towel or my hair dryer." And she put the puppy in the microwave and of course melted the dog. Uh, Urban legend, never happened. But it rose from a misunderstanding of the technology. So I think one of my theories is people don't understand vaccines. They don't know how they work. So like I know people who they've gotten the flu vaccine. They're like, oh, I got the flu vaccine and then I still got the flu. It's like, well, yeah, that can happen, but your resultant flu was probably not nearly as bad as it would have been if you weren't vaccinated. That's how it works. So so I think people just generally misunderstand that. And like fan death in Korea, this misunderstanding of vaccines is just persisting. We've had vaccines for a very long time now, and it just persists, and it just continues to create more and more urban legends and conspiracy theories. So that's just my idea. Yeah.
Makes sense. People try to find some sort of explanation for what they don't know. And you have that with all kinds of things from seemingly mundane, which until now was vaccines. That was just standard. I got one every year. I still get one every year for the flu.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just because I think at one time I didn't really think about it. Once when I first became an adult and I moved out, I was on my own and I got the flu. And it was the first time I'd ever been sick out by myself. And I can remember that distinct feeling of just isolation. Like I'm by
Right.
myself. My mom is not here to make chicken soup for me and to take care of me. I am stuck in this apartment. And if I run out of resources, I'm out of luck.
Right.
And so that experience stayed with me. And ever since then, I have never failed to get that flu vaccine. Because if I've ever I don't think I've ever had it since, or if I did, it was so mild that I never got it diagnosed. So for me, vaccines, it just makes perfect sense. And I don't know all the science behind them, but I know the basics. It's like a weakened version of the virus. And in this case, it's slightly different because it's mRNA. I don't know all the details behind that, I'll admit.
I don't either. I don't either.
But it's one of those that when a doctor with a PhD in molecular biology and infectious diseases explains this to me, I was like, you know what? I will trust you because this is your life and you know this more than me.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, and that's the thing for me as well. One of my old close friends here in Korea is a doctor, and I spoke to him about it, and he's like, yeah, get it. He said, this is how it works. And he explained it. So it's me trusting my friend who went to school for 7 years to become a doctor and then and he's been a doctor for over 20 years. So it's me trusting him. So another conspiracy theory that I've heard is that all doctors are in on it, so don't trust any of your doctors. It's like, oh, for God's sake, come on. Every doctor in the world is in on it, including my friend. And he wants to harm me and my family.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my wife about conspiracy theories. Like there's actually research done on this. And I wish I knew the actual paper, but like they can calculate, depending on the size of of amount of people it would take for a theory, they can determine how many it would take for it to actually work. And then based on that, how fast it would break down. Like the more people are involved, the quicker it's going to break down because people can't keep secrets.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. It's just, it's just so silly. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered conspiracy theories, but and we probably are running out of time. But this being the Halloween episode, we can't end things without a good ghost story, and that is your expertise over there. I definitely want to hear any good ones that you have.
Okay. Yeah. So, like as you said at the beginning, I am a heritage interpreter, but I have a very strong focus on folklore. So I've studied folklore as well, although I'm not a folklorist. I'm more of an armchair folklorist, but it's kind of a subcategory of my heritage studies because folklore passing through generations is heritage, gets passed down. Another focus of my studies, heritage studies, something that I'm very interested in is how folklore, or sorry, how heritage stops being passed on. So I'm interested in when folk stories stop being passed on, or they stop being believed, passed on in such a way that they're believed, and they just become part of the storytelling tradition of a group of people. That's very fascinating. So recently, actually within the last like 17 years or so, I've been just gathering a lot of folk stories and ghost lore and urban legends from people. That I set up interviews. I do qualitative research. Like I'll set up a block of time, and it's like, okay, I'm going to do this research over the next 2 or 3 months, and then I'll categorize all my research. Just recently, I did a bunch of qualitative research interviews about urban legends, and these are all Koreans that I interviewed. And so I'll share some of the stories that were about ghosts. Funnily enough, all the people that I interviewed knew about fan death. I never brought it up. When you're researching this kind of thing, you don't want to inject ideas into the interviewees because you don't want to direct them. You want them to tell you their stories purely. So, but all of them brought up fan death. I was like, okay. And so I got different, but none of them believed in it. So, it is, so it's not being believed anymore, but it still persists as knowledge. But I got a lot of great ghost stories, mostly from when these people were kids, and I'll share a few of them. Now, one way, like you asked me at the beginning there, like how urban legends in Korea and in say the US are similar. There is a type of folk tale, an urban legend, and keeping in mind that urban legends are a genre of folklore, so they're modern folk tales. One of them that's persistent and you can find all around the world is the vanishing hitchhiker. So something, you're driving along a dark road, and you see it's normally a woman on the side of the road, and you pull over, pick them up. They get in the back seat usually, but sometimes it's in the front seat. They ask you where they're going. Sorry, you ask them where they're going, and they tell you, and you drive up the road, and then you're like, okay, well, this is it. And you turn to look, and they're gone. And your location at the end varies from story to story. Sometimes it's a cemetery, which just implies that she's going home to her tomb, her grave. Sometimes it's a house, and then the person gets out and like, what happened? And they go and they knock on the door of the house, and they say, I just picked up a young woman named June, and I dropped her off here, and she disappeared. Did she come in? And then it's an older woman. She breaks down crying. It's like, June is my daughter. She died 30 years ago. And it breaks down things like that. So very, very common. But in Korea, the versions of this particular ghost urban legend doesn't involve hitchhikers, because hitchhiking isn't a thing in Korea. People don't hitchhike. So these types of stories have been morphed into taxi drivers. So taxi drivers pick up people along dark highways, and especially a highway that's not far from my house. It's just riddled with ghost stories, ghosts all along that highway. And one of them involves a woman. Now, this highway is called the Jayuro, which means freedom road. Jayu means freedom in Korea. Ro, or lo, is road, and it's used for bigger roads like highways. So one of them is a taxi driver is driving along the northern area of the highway, which is not far from where I live, which is close to the border with North Korea, and it's quite dark there. Some people live around that area, but it's mostly dark, and it's just military. But a taxi driver, for some reason, is driving along this road, 1 or 2 in the morning, and he sees a woman on the side of the road, and he decides to stop. He says, do you need a ride? And she gets in, and she says, yes, I'm going to such and such a place. And then he drives up the road a ways, and then when he stops, says, that'll be $5, and she's gone. And he gets out and he looks around, and he's next to a small family tomb, family graveyard. And those family graves are all over Korea. Very different from European, which is, European style graves, which are our traditions in North America as well, the big cemeteries. in Korea, they are mounds. Everyone's buried in a mound, and there's a small headstone next to it. And they're all over the place. They're everywhere, especially in the area where I live. I live kind of in the countryside in the north, not North Korea, but in the north part of South Korea. And yeah, all the hills around my house, there's old abandoned graves everywhere. You'd love it. So if you're ever coming over to Korea once traveling internationally gets better, yeah, I'll take you to visit some of these abandoned graves all around the northern hills here.
My wife would love to do that. I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah. Well, come on over when traveling is possible again. And so he gets out, and then there's this, it's a family tomb. So he brought her home. So that's a very common story that you'll see around the world. So it's another commonality between Korean and American urban legends. But one of the interviews I did recently was a man in his mid 40s, and he heard an urban legend when he was younger. A friend of a friend told him. Perfect example of an urban legend. He said the man was driving along a highway, and he was driving drunk. He was out, had a few drinks with his buddies, driving drunk on the Jayudo, on that highway. And when he was driving along the darker parts of the highway in the middle of the night, he saw a woman standing on the side of the road. He thought, that's weird. She shouldn't be out here by herself. It's dangerous. So he pulled over and asked her if she wanted to ride. So she hops in the back seat, asked her where she wanted to go, and she gave the address, and he popped it into his GPS. And then he started to drive. I guess he wasn't driving. Obviously, he was drunk, so he was swerving a little bit, I suppose. And the police caught him, pulled him over, gave him a breathalyzer. He was drunk. And when he turned to say, I'm giving this girl a ride home, she was gone. And the cop said, come on, you're drunk. You're hallucinating. You're so drunk, you're hallucinating. You're imagining things. So they brought him into the police station. They brought his car and called his wife. And his wife came in. She's like, what are you doing driving drunk? This is awful. Like, I can't believe you did that. Come on, we're going home. They charged him and took him home. She hopped in the car, and she was a little bit nervous driving. And she turned on the GPS, and the coordinates were still there that he had recently punched in, when the coordinates that the young woman had given him. And she figured it was the coordinates for taking to go home. So she started following the coordinates, and they said, she's like, this isn't, where are we going? Why, what is this place? She kept following it. Her husband was passed out in the back seat. And then when the GPS told him that they had arrived, she looked down, she looked around. They're in the middle of nowhere, and they were next to a family tomb. So very, very common ending to that as well. But it adds the modern idea of a GPS, and not picking up a hitchhiker, but having compassion for a person who's in the middle of a dark highway with nothing around to access, but adding all these modern flavors to it to update these stories. And that's what I love about a lot of these stories, because they get updated. So really, really, really interesting. And a lot of this may be linked to what some people say is the maybe the origin of the Jayudo ghost. Allegedly, a long time ago, there was a man who strangled probably his wife. They had an argument, probably driving one night. He pulled over, they got out of the car, and then he killed her. He strangled her and threw her body off of the side of the highway, and he drove away. A lot of people say that it's her ghost, which is haunting the highway now. One of the ghosts haunting the highway. And if it is her, she would be what in Korean tradition, folk tradition, is a wonhon. Won kind of means, basically a wonhon is kind of like a grudge spirit, a vengeful ghost. Hon means a soul or spirit. Won is grieving, but having grief to the point of anger. So wonhon can be like a vengeful spirit, someone who was killed, wrongly, died in a bad way, and murdered and things like that. So yeah, so these are the kinds of stories that exist along the Gyado. And if people want to go to our Dark Side of Soul page and to our podcast, my co-host and I, Joe, we did an episode. We mostly record just audio for our episodes, but we did a whole episode with video. Unless you're a Patreon, you want to join our Patreon, you can get the videos of all the episodes. But we did one video episode for everybody that was a public episode where we drove around in Joe's car all around the north. We're very close to North Korea, where we're driving around, and we're sharing urban legends and folk tales and ghost stories that are related to highways and cars. So that's a fun episode, and you can listen to that or watch that episode to get more stories like that. Let's see, what else do I got? Some of these really good ones. Well, okay, this a categorization that I have as well is rural ghosts. Now, Korea, not very long ago, was nationally mostly very rural. And despite how a lot of people view Korea today and how the government actually promotes the country, it's still mostly rural. There's really only one big city here, and it's Seoul. The second biggest city is Busan. It's not even half the size of Seoul. It's a very, very small city. And then all the other cities like Daejeon, Daegu, they're not very big cities. So it's really only Seoul that is kind of like this super metropolis. And the general Seoul area is called the Sudogwan in Korean, and that means like metropolitan Seoul. So it actually includes where I live, but I live in a very rural area. It's 20 or so million people in this huge area, and it's like roughly half the population. And the rest of the country is mostly countryside. So there are a lot of rural ghost stories. So there was one man who told me that he lived in a city when he was a little boy. He's in his 50s in a city called Jeonju, which is actually my wife's hometown. And they would go swimming in a river called the Jeonju-jeon, or the Jeonju River. He said that in the years ago, a long time ago, apparently a lot of people drowned in the river, and he even saw a dead body when he was a boy. He remembers being quite young, and people gathered around, and there was someone floating face down in the river. So with all these dead bodies, people apparently committing suicide in the river, there were a lot of stories of what's called the mulkwishin. And kwishin generally means ghost. There are other words for ghost in Korean, but kwishin is more of a ghost that interacts with humans. And mulkwishin, mul means water. So mulkwishin literally means water ghost. So there was a story that there was a water ghost, a mulkwishin, or lots of them in the river. Now, it didn't really, he said, like, they were kind of afraid of these ghosts, but not to the point where it stopped them from swimming in the river, especially in the really, really hot summer. Jeonju's kind of more down, it's much farther south than Seoul is. And Seoul's quite north in South Korea, not that far from the border. Jeonju is more like it's kind of central west of South Korea. So it's hot. It's really hot in the summer. So even though they were kind of afraid of ghosts, the mulkwishin, when they were kids, they were still, they were hot. they were, so they would go swimming. And what kid doesn't love swimming in a river or a pond or a lake on a hot summer day? So, but he said right around 1975, he and his friends together kind of dared each other to go to an area called the Hanbyok-lu, or the Hanbyok-yu. And the Hanbyok was the really deep part of the Jeonju River. So it was kind of the more dangerous part because it was so deep. But it was also the cooler part. The water ran faster there, and the water was cooler. So it was the nicest part of the river to swim, if you could swim. So they all kind of dared each other to go into the deeper part of the river, see how far out into the river they could go. So he remembers very clearly that he was a very strong swimmer. He swam out as far as he could, kind of to the middle part of the river where it was deepest. And his friends are like, "Oh, great, you're great. You're a great swimmer. You win. You're the best. You're the best one. You win." So he started swimming back. And when he started swimming back, something grabbed his leg under the water. And he's very adamant that it felt like a hand. And he couldn't move. And he started kicking and kicking, and he was being dragged under. And he was still he was flailing around trying to get away. And then he felt his other leg grabbed. So it was as if somebody under the water was using both hands and grabbing both of his legs and then trying to pull him back. And he distinctly remembers the feeling of being pulled backwards. So whatever was grabbing him had strength. And initially he was like, did I hit some weeds or something, or a rope? But he said it felt like hands, and the hands were kind of moving. Like if you grab someone, you kind of shift your grip a little bit to kind of, as when they're pulling away, you shift your grip so you can maintain your grip. And he said that's what it felt like. And a couple of times he was pulled under, he swallowed water, and he was kicking and kicking, trying to get away from whatever this was that was grabbing him. And eventually he started kicking so hard that one hand that was grabbing his leg let go, and then the other one let go. And then choking, he just swam as fast as he could to the shore, and he started crying. And his friends were comforting him. It's like, what happened? And he said he couldn't bring himself to tell anyone for like 2 or 3 days. He was so shocked. And his parents were very, very concerned. They took him to a doctor. He refused to tell the doctor what happened. And then eventually, after a couple of days, he kind of calmed down and he told everyone what happened. And like his grandparents believed him, because the older generation, they're like, oh, it was the Mulquishin. You were attacked by a water ghost. And his parents are like, come on. They're like, well, what do you think happened? Explain it. And his friends believed him. And after that, they wouldn't swim in the Hambyokru, the deepest part of the river, again after that time. And he's never been there since. So that was just told to me recently. So, and he's adamant that it happened. So it is, that particular story is an alleged ghost encounter, but centered around the urban legends of people committing suicide in that river and coming back as ghosts. So it's linked together in that way. So very, very interesting.
It is. I've noticed the stories you've told, the stories of spirits in Korea, and maybe it's just the ones you've told me, but they seem especially vengeful. At least the stories you're telling me anyway.
Well, yeah, and yes, because they're often the most interesting. So
there are some sad ones out there that don't hurt anybody.
Yeah, and there are yes, like there are and there are vengeful ghosts, and like I said, they're called wonhon. So the Korean language has a specific word for that type of ghost. We can say in English vengeful spirit, vengeful ghost, and that's what wonhon means. But we don't have I guess it is a specific word, but it's more like a description instead of an actual, like a Latin word or something like that. But yeah, there are stories of ghosts that are vengeful. They are wonhon, but they're only vengeful against one specific person, the person who did them wrong. And then they come back to try to get justice. They just seek justice. They're wonhon, they're vengeful, but they're seeking justice. And when their murder is resolved, when their murderer is captured, then they are appeased, and then they disappear. They go away. Or they remain, and they need to be continually appeased. So in the past, there would be places where this kind of people believe this particular wonhon existed, but was appeased, but continually needs to be appeased. So they build shrines. And still today, they will have rituals at different times of year, depending on maybe like if they have within the local lore, they have a date when the person was killed, or when the person's murderer was captured, or they appease them at different holidays like Chuseok. Chuseok is kind of Korea's traditional, really old harvest celebration. It's coming up soon, but well, actually, by the time after, as we're recording, it's coming up soon. By the time it's released, it will have passed. But yeah, they'll appease them at different times a day, of year. And then Koreans also have rituals in their home to appease their ancestral spirits. And a lot of people still do this. They either do it out of culture, tradition, or some people still do it out of literal belief. They believe that their ancestral spirits need to be appeased. You have to feed ghosts, and you have to give them drinks. So they have these rituals, usually again, like on Chuseok, on this harvest celebration. They'll do it at a different time. It's said that the earlier you do it, the better. So some people will set it up very early in the morning before the sun rises. Some people will do it right at midnight when the day changes, and they have their table all set up, and they'll have fruit on the table. They have alcohol, rice, a bowl of rice, and maybe some vegetables and things like that. And definitely rice cakes, which in Korean is called deok. And these are the offerings for the ancestral spirit. And in some traditions, they say when you light incense, the smoke of the incense is the way for the spirits to descend to earth. They descend to earth via the smoke, and you summon them, and then they arrive on the smoke, and then they sit and they feast. If you don't do this in some traditions, remember, one thing to really remember about folklore is that it does change from region to region, era to era. So generally speaking, if you don't appease your ancestral spirits, it was believed after like every 2 or 3 years, if they haven't been appeased, they get hungry and they become vengeful. They become not vengeful so much as hungry. They become upset. They're angry that you're not appeasing them. And then they can become problematic. They can start haunting your home. They can cause sickness, definitely sickness. Ghosts and malevolent spirits were often used to explain things like smallpox, and these spirits would have to be appeased. And so they can be just right at their core wicked, like the mulquishin, the water ghost. They are kind of at their core wicked, and you can appease them in some traditions, but other ones, they don't care. Their appeasement is life, not a bottle of booze. So but the ancestral spirits, yeah, they're generally friendly as long as they're appeased. So it just depends on which kind of spirit you're talking about. It's very fascinating stuff, though. Yeah.
Yes, it is, without a
And
doubt. I could listen to that all night.
Yeah, and I really wish a lot of this kind of this core of Korean ghost lore was more widely known, because like there are a lot of no, there aren't a lot, but there are a few books, really, really good books written in English by some of my colleagues, or people that I know through colleagues, who have, like me, they've lived in Korea, and they've researched Korea for a really long time. And some of them I've known people, I've known people who had been in Korea for 50 years. There was one man, Peter Bartholomew, who just passed away a couple months ago. He was an expert on Korean traditional homes. Now, there are several different types of traditional homes, but the one he was interested in the most was called the Hanok. And the Hanok was more of the homes of the upper class. And because he was interested in homes and in the very traditional way of building these homes, he had a lot of haunted house stories. And he had stories as like, yeah, I've come across a lot of these old Hanok and the older parts of Seoul or the older parts of the country, a lot of strange things are happening there. They're really, really weird. And unfortunately, he was just this vessel of knowledge of Korea. He came here in the American Peace Corps in like 1963 and never left, and just became he's fluent in Korean, and just interviewed people and became friends with so many old people, the elders, and that's who you get stories from, right? So yeah, and he died a couple months ago, never wrote a book. All that information is gone. It's just gone. It just disappears.
That's awful, because I could have just sat and listened to all of his stories for so long. And I'd love to explore the places he talked about where supposedly all the strange things happen. I've always told people I'd love to go on a ghost hunt, even though I would probably be disappointed when it's over.
That's right. And that's what a lot of people, when they come on the Dark Side of Soul tour, we have had people, I may have mentioned this last year when I was on, we have had people on the tour claim to have had supernatural experiences, to see ghosts.
You did. One gentleman you mentioned a story about.
Yeah. And there have been, I think since haven't had, because of COVID, we haven't had too many tours in the last year and a half, but maybe since then, on at least one of our tours, people claim to have some strange sensations in areas that we visit that are allegedly haunted.
I think if I ever did encounter a ghost of any type, I would react just like Ray from Ghostbusters, just pure joy and fascination. It's like, oh, it's here, it's real.
Yeah, it's real.
I'd be excited. Yeah.
Get her.
Get her.
Get her.
That's
get
the
her.
whole plan.
That's all you had. That was your plan, Ray.
Yeah. And of course, listen, you smell something? That's the best line of the whole movie.
I'm probably going to watch that again tonight. It's on Netflix here, so I think I'm going to watch it again tonight.
Oh, curse you. I have to watch it on DVD.
Well, that's better. So, and speaking of DVDs, just before we, I know maybe we have to wrap up, but if anyone's interested, I recently, and I'll show you anyway. If anybody's watching the video, arguably Korea's greatest horror film is A Tale of Two Sisters. And that is very loosely based on a Chosun era, which is, say, about 300-year-old folktale called Jeonghwa Hongyeon Jeon. And Jeonghwa and Hongyeon are the names of the two sisters in the tale, and Jeon means story, tale. So The Tale of Two Sisters, first Korean horror movie I saw in Korea. I saw it in theater in 2003 when it was released. And then it was also one of the earliest catalysts that really got me into exploring more ghost lore in Korea. But they just, Arrow Films, Arrow Video, out of the UK, just as of recording a few days ago, released a special edition Blu-ray of the film, and they tapped me a few months ago to be part of it, and I wrote and narrated a video essay that's on the Blu-ray, explaining, and the essay is called "Spirits of the Peninsula: Folklore in Korean Cinema," and I did a translation of the original folktale as it was first told to me, like 18 years ago, and that's included in the booklet. So, and that's the case there, if you're interested. So, if anyone wants to, if everyone's looking for a good Asian horror movie that's very psychological, takes a lot of twists. At the end of the movie, you might be like, what happened? What's going on? I don't get it. It may take a couple of, maybe a second watch to fully get it. But it's just a fascinating, excellent story. And the new Blu-ray has my video commentary with a lot more information about ghosts and folklore in Korea, things that I've gathered over the years directly from Koreans and my research, interviewing and speaking with Koreans. So yeah, go to Arrow Video and I'm not. They've already paid me for it. I will not get more money if you buy it. My job with it is done, but it's already being said by a lot of reviewers. It's the best. It's the Blu-ray to get this year. It's the best Blu-ray release of 2021.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get that, you can.
I'll have to look for that one.
Yeah, see some of my work.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks again for joining me. It's a challenge logistically sometimes for us to make this happen. Took a few tries. We finally got it.
Yeah, we're supposed to do this like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but, I think this is our third attempt. But
I think it is our third. Yeah, right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's always a treat. I love hearing the ghost stories, and I really do love the all of the just Asian culture and history. I took one course in college. It was East Asian history, and I know I barely scratched the tip of the iceberg with that. But ever since then, I've just been in love with everything in the area. It just, I don't know, just everything just about the mindset, the culture, the history just fascinates me. And then when I started discovering the ghost stories, then I really got all in. It only got worse from there.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully, yeah, I know you have a big family, so it'd be pricey to fly this way, but if you can swing it, yeah, you wouldn't regret it. And your kids would love it too. They have so much fun.
It's on my bucket list.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, and
thank you, Matt.
Take it easy and stay safe where you are.
Thank you. You too.
Hey, if you haven't already, be sure to visit the official Shore Manor online t-shirt shop, the purveyors of all things spooky and all things Halloween, as long as it's in t-shirt form. You can find it at mattshore.net. Just click on shop at the top of the page. And while you're there, be sure to use the promo code journalist and get 10% off of everything in the store. Once again, that's mattshore.net and click on shop at the top of the page. All right. Thank you once again, Sean, for that great interview and those spectacular stories. Love a good ghost story. And you know me. So it was a treat. It was fascinating to hear about the things going on over there and how similar they are to us. You know, it's both encouraging sometimes to know that we're not the only ones making some mistakes, but it's also a little depressing. Like, sometimes wish it could be confined just to us, but that's just not the case. But anyway, regardless, you know, as we move forward, like I said last week, take care of yourselves and be safe. That's the most important thing. And as far as like what to do moving forward, talk to a trusted physician. Don't get your information from Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything. There's a saying that Star Trek: The Next Generation fans like myself like to use, and that is trust data, not lore. For those who may not know, Data is the beloved android from that series. He was a hero, and his number one programming thing was to always protect human life. So he always, no matter what, that was his first primary function. Lore was his brother, and Lore was not so heroic, even though he looked exactly like Data, and it was easy to get them confused. Lore was manipulative. Lore was deadly in some ways. Lore was dangerous. And so that it's a perfect metaphor for life. You know, trust data. Data is, you know, scientific facts. It's researched out heavily. It's cross-referenced. It's peer-reviewed. It's studied by multiple people to ensure that it is accurate and concise. Whereas lore, you know, like we're talking with conspiracy theories, urban legends, that there is no sort of scientific filter on lore. Lore just goes out and it spreads. And sometimes lore can be confused with data. So don't get it confused. Always trust data and make sure that it's data, even though sometimes maybe they look alike, but trust data, not lore. So important announcements. I would like to ask again, everybody, to, if you would, check out my brand new Patreon page. It's patreon.com/Matt Shore. It's only been up a few weeks, but we've already got quite a bit of content there. There's weekly blogs from me, as well as some ghost stories, also told by yours truly. Sean is not the only scary storyteller out there. Please go check them out. Consider subscribing. It's all very, very affordable. We made it so that even if you just subscribe for $1, yeah, you get something out of the deal. So I'd love to have your support there. If you would go check it out. Once again, that is patreon.com/Matt Shore. And other important announcements. My wife and I launched our own YouTube show recently, The Shore Manor Chronicles, which is all about our spooky adventures centered around Halloween. We've done episodes talking about our brand new 12-foot skeleton, not to mention our pumpkin farm in our backyard that's pretty much taken over the entire lawn. And in the coming weeks, there's also going to be an episode about our trip to Salem, Massachusetts, aka Witch City, this month. We're pretty excited about that one. So check both of those out if you would. It's tinyurl.com/Shore Manor YouTube. Once again, tinyurl.com/Shore Manor YouTube. And speaking of YouTube and all things social media, this podcast is a part of Shore Manor Studio, which you can find both on Facebook and YouTube. Please look us up there, like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shore Manor, and on YouTube, once again, by going to tinyurl.com/Shore Manor YouTube. All of this show's episodes are there in their entirety, now with video, so please go check that out. You can also sign up for my newsletter at mattshore.net/newsletter, or if you just want to navigate to my page, mattshore.net, click on the menu at the top of the page and select newsletter. Sign up there. You'll be there first to hear about announcements and exclusive discounts and giveaways on all the Shore Manor swag that we got, so don't miss that. You can also look us up on our official website, www.mattshore.net, where you'll find this and previous episodes archived. Just click on the podcast link at the top of the page. And finally, if you'd like to connect with me directly, you can find me on Twitter at @TheMattShore and on Instagram at The Shore. Also, if you'd like to connect the old-fashioned way, you can reach me at email. It's mattshore@hotmail.com. And finally, I decided to join the TikTok bandwagon. I said that last week. So if you're on TikTok and you want to look me up there, you can find me at @the1Matt Shore. That's the1 Matt Shore. And that brings us to a close. So, once again, stay safe and take care of yourselves. All right. It's difficult times. We will get through them. It's going to be difficult, but we will make it out. We will make it through to the other side. So keep listening, keep reading, and above all, stay spooky.